At my anniversary, my mother-in-law raised her glass to the daughter of a soup maker who successfully married well. My husband was choking with laughter and recording it on his phone. But my mother said 3 words that made my mother-in-law go pale. Alice met Steve at a corporate party of a construction company where she worked as an office manager. He came as a representative of a building materials supplier, tall, with dimples on his cheeks and attentive brown eyes. There was a spark between them when she accidentally spilled champagne on him, and he laughed and said it was for good luck. Gregory, Steve's last name, progressed rapidly. Just a month later, Steve introduced her to his family, his father, a retired colonel, and his mother, Tiffany, a former head of the local library. Alice remembered her first visit to Steve's parental home. She was nervous, bought a cake from an expensive bakery, and wore a modest dress with a collar. "So you're a secretary?" Tiffany asked again, examining Alice through glasses on a chain. "Office manager," Alice clarified, feeling her cheeks flush. "Same thing," the future mother-in-law waved it off. "And what do your parents do?" Alice hesitated for a moment. "Mom works in a business center, in the cleaning service. Dad died when I was 14. "In cleaning service?" Tiffany raised her eyebrows. "You mean a janitor?" Steve coughed, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Alice nodded, raising her chin a little higher. Yes, her mother cleaned floors and offices to put her through school, and Alice had never been ashamed of that. "Interesting," Tiffany said, putting down her cup. "Steve, you said she's from a good family." "Mom," he finally interrupted. "Alice is from a wonderful family." But it was already too late. From that moment, Tiffany saw Alice as a gold digger after her son's money, although he was just an ordinary sales manager, not a millionaire. The wedding was held 6 months later. Tiffany insisted on a banquet in a restaurant with columns, where half the district celebrated. Alice dreamed of an intimate ceremony but quickly realized that marrying Steve meant accepting his mother as the commander-in-chief of their family life. "You must understand that now you are Zavialova," her mother-in-law said at the wedding, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Our family is known in town, we're intelligentsia." They spent their honeymoon in Mexico, at a hotel chosen by Tiffany. She even packed a separate suitcase for Steve with medicines and instructions, where to eat and which excursions to take. Underscore 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 underscore. The first year of marriage passed in attempts to conform. Alice cooked according to her mother-in-law's recipes, learned how to set the table properly, and endured Tiffany's weekly inspection visits. "You have dust under the TV," she usually began, running her finger over the surfaces. "Steve can't live in such conditions. He's allergic." Steve wasn't allergic, but he never contradicted his mother. Then they started planning for a child. Month after month passed with no result. At first, Tiffany asked delicately, then started bringing articles about female infertility and addresses of gynecologists. "Steve is a healthy boy, always been robust," she said, flipping through a family album. "Probably, the problem is something else." Alice took all the tests, no pathologies were found. Then it was Steve's turn. He resisted for a long time but agreed after a year of unsuccessful attempts. The results were discouraging: serious spermogram problems, low sperm motility, low concentration. "It's temporary," Steve waved it off, hiding the doctor's report in his desk drawer. "Stress at work." Tiffany refused to believe the diagnosis. She started calling clinics, demanding retests, accusing the labs of incompetence. When the third test confirmed the initial diagnosis, she suggested an unexpected solution. "Maybe you just aren't compatible," she told Alice in private. "Sometimes that happens. Maybe Steve needs another woman to become a father?" Alice told Steve about this conversation. He nervously laughed. "Mom's just worried about the family line continuing. Don't pay attention." But Alice saw how her husband was changing. He became irritable, often stayed late at work, avoided intimacy. The problems with conceiving became a heavy burden for their relationship, and Tiffany skillfully used it to drive a wedge between them. As Alice's 30th birthday approached, she decided to use it as a chance to restart their relationship. 2 years of marriage, filled with gradual drifting apart and quiet quarrels, should be left behind. "I want to throw a real celebration," she told Steve at breakfast. "Invite your parents, my friends, colleagues. Maybe at Edelweiss? It's beautiful there. As you say. Just check with your mom, she might have plans then." For 3 months, Alice planned her anniversary. She booked a hall in the Edelweiss restaurant overlooking the river, composed a menu of favorite dishes, chose table decorations, arrangements of freesias and lisianthus. "Isn't it too expensive?" Steve asked when he saw the estimate. "Maybe we should celebrate at a cafe?" "I only turned 30 once in my life," Alice answered firmly. "I'll pay for everything with my own money." She had been saving for this celebration since the beginning of the year, denying herself small pleasures. She wanted a real party, bright, without compromises or cutting corners. The first big anniversary of her marriage. At the Galactica shopping center, she found a sea green dress with an open back and delicate embroidery on the bodice. It fit her slender figure perfectly, emphasizing her waist and flowing over her hips. "Are you going to wear this?" Steve asked when she showed him the dress. "Isn't it a bit too revealing?" "It's an elegant evening gown," Alice replied. "It's perfect for such an occasion." "As you say," he answered without looking up from his phone. A week before the anniversary, Alice invited her mom to lunch. Rachel came straight from work, tired, but with a gift, silver earrings with aquamarine. "Sweetheart, you didn't have to throw such a banquet," her mom said, looking at the restaurant photos. "We could have stayed home and made soup." "Mom, I want a real celebration," Alice hugged her by the shoulders. "You deserve a beautiful evening just as much as I do." Rachel sighed. "Will Tiffany be there?" "Of course. She and Steve's father will come. Promise me you'll stay calm even if she starts her usual games." "I'm not worried about myself," Rachel shook her head. "I'm worried about you. I saw how she nagged you last New Year. Such a haughty lady." Alice forced a smile. "Everything will be fine. I'm grown up now, I can handle it." That evening, the day before the celebration, Alice was double-checking the guest list when Steve announced, "By the way, Mom said Dad won't come. High blood pressure. She'll come alone." Alice felt a chill. Tiffany was twice as dangerous without her husband. No one restrained her barbs. "Fine," she said quietly. "I hope your father feels better soon." On the morning of her anniversary, Alice spent time at the beauty salon, styling, makeup, manicure. She wanted to look flawless. She chose a restrained but elegant makeup look and arranged her hair in a high updo with several loose strands. At home, Steve waited for her with a bouquet of roses. "Happy birthday," he said, kissing her on the cheek. "You look amazing." For a moment, she thought everything was getting better, that the anniversary would really be a fresh start for their marriage. "Mom called," Steve added, breaking the moment. She'll come straight to the restaurant and ask for a special menu. She's on a diet, Steve explained. Alice clenched her teeth but nodded. Tiffany always found new ways to draw attention to herself, demanding special treatment. I'll notify the manager, she said, heading to the closet for her dress. Steve sat on the edge of the bed. Listen, you're not going to say anything about our fertility problems, right? Mom would be upset if the guests found out. Alice froze, dress in hand. Upset your mom? And what about the fact that she's constantly implying I'm infertile? Am I supposed to like that? Come on, Steve frowned. It's your day today. Let's keep it drama-free. Alice took a deep breath. He was right. Today was her day, and she wouldn't let anyone spoil it. Okay, she said, smoothing the dress. Everything will be fine. Help me with the zipper. The clock showed 5 p.m. 2 hours remained before the event started. Alice put on the earrings, a gift from her mom, sprayed her wrists with her favorite perfume, and looked in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back was 30 years old, confident, beautiful, full of hope. Alice smiled at her reflection. Everything will be perfect, she promised herself. This is my day. Steve waited for her in the living room, glancing at the clock. Ready? The taxi is downstairs. Alice nodded, grabbed her purse, and headed for the door. At the threshold, she stopped, suddenly feeling a strange premonition, as if something important and irreversible was about to happen tonight. Let's go, Steve called. And she stepped out the door, into her anniversary, not yet knowing this evening would change her entire life. The Edelweiss restaurant greeted Alice and Steve with soft lighting and melodic music. The administrator, a slim girl in a formal suit, led them to the reserved hall with panoramic windows overlooking the evening river. Everything is ready as you requested, she said. Floral arrangements on the tables, the menu is approved. The musicians will arrive in half an hour. Alice took in the space with a glance. Round tables covered with ivory tablecloths, flickering candles and crystal holders, fresh flowers and low vases so guests wouldn't block each other's view. Exactly how she had imagined her celebration. Perfect, she smiled. Thank you very much. Steve took out his phone and snapped a few pictures of the empty hall. I'll send these to Mom, he explained. She wanted to see how everything is arranged. Alice suppressed a sigh. Even at this moment, Tiffany's invisible presence was looming nearby. Alice's colleagues arrived first, a noisy bunch with balloons and a large gift box. Olivia, her closest work friend, hugged the birthday girl. Oh my God, you look stunning, she exclaimed, admiring the dress. Like a sea goddess. Following the colleagues came the other guests, classmates with their husbands, distant relatives, university friends. Alice greeted each one with a sincere smile, showed them to their seats, and thanked them for their congratulations. At just past 6, Rachel appeared. She entered hesitantly, glancing around, clearly feeling out of place among the luxurious decor. She wore a simple dark blue dress, her hair neatly pinned up. Minimal makeup, a face marked by years of hard work. Mom. Alice hurried to meet her, embracing her. You look wonderful. Rachel smiled shyly. I bought this dress new at the department store. Isn't it too plain for a place like this? It's perfect, Alice assured her, taking her arm. Come, I'll seat you next to me. Mom pulled a small box from her bag. Here, darling. Not gold, of course, but from the heart. Inside was a silver bracelet with a small angel pendant. To watch over you, Rachel explained. Alice felt a sting in her eyes. She knew this gift had cost her mother months of saving. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, fastening the bracelet on her wrist. "I'll never take it off." By 8 o'clock, the hall was almost full. Only Tiffany was missing, and her absence felt like the calm before the storm. "Where's your mom?" Alice asked Steve as the waiters began serving appetizers. He shrugged. "She said she'd be here any minute. You know how she loves dramatic entrances." As if on cue, the doors flew open and Tiffany entered the hall. She wore a deep burgundy evening gown embroidered with beads. A heavy necklace glittered around her neck, and her high hairstyle was crowned with a jeweled clip. She paused at the doorway, allowing everyone to admire her outfit. "Son!" she exclaimed, opening her arms wide. Steve immediately jumped up, leaving Alice behind, and rushed to his mother. He hugged her, kissed her cheek, and took her arm. "Mom, you look amazing," he said admiringly. "A new dress?" "Yes, specially for this event," Tiffany purred. "Wanted to match the level." Passing the tables, she nodded to acquaintances, greeted those she knew, and ignored the rest. Her eyes glanced at Rachel, lingered for a fraction of a second, and moved on as if Rachel were a piece of furniture. Approaching Alice, Tiffany barely touched her cheek with her lips. "Happy birthday, dear. I hope you didn't forget my special menu." "Of course, I'm on a diet." "I arranged everything," Alice replied, feeling the muscles in her face tense as she tried to keep a smile. Tiffany walked to the table and, without waiting to be offered a seat, chose the chair next to the one reserved for Alice. "Stephen, you sit next to me," she commanded, patting the adjacent chair. Steve nodded without even looking at his wife and sat down between his mother and one of his friends. Alice had to sit on the other side of her mother-in-law, caught between Tiffany and her own mother. Tiffany immediately began inspecting the hall like an experienced inspector. She straightened the tablecloth, pushed a glass aside, shook her head, and studied the floral arrangement. "Interesting choice of flowers," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "In our day, serious events ordered orchids." Alice took a deep breath. "I like freesias and eustomas. They're delicate and elegant." Naturally, the mother-in-law replied. "Everyone has their own taste. By the way, the menu here is outrageously expensive. Stephen showed me the list. Are you sure you can afford this?" Steve, who was chatting animatedly with a friend, didn't even notice the jab. "I work, and I can afford a nice celebration once a year," Alice answered firmly. Tiffany smiled. "Of course. I'm just worried about your budget. You still need to save for an apartment." Alice and Steve had been living in a rented apartment for 2 years, saving up for the down payment on their own place. And Tiffany knew perfectly well that mentioning this was a sore subject. Fortunately, at that moment the musicians began to play, and the host announced the start of the celebration. Alice smiled gratefully at him. He had come as a rescue. The waiters served cold appetizers, and champagne filled the glasses. The host, a young man in a bow tie, introduced himself as Patrick and proposed the first toast to the birthday girl. "Dear guests, today we have gathered to celebrate the anniversary of the wonderful Alice. 30 years is the age when a woman blossoms in full strength, retaining youth while gaining wisdom." The guests applauded, raising their glasses. Alice smiled, feeling the tension gradually ease. The evening was just beginning, and she could simply enjoy the attention and warmth of friends. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Tiffany scrutinizing the salad plate brought to her separately. "Is this with salmon?" she asked the waiter. "I asked for trout. Salmon has too high a glycemic index for my diet." The young waiter glanced confusedly at Alice. "I'll check with the kitchen, ma'am, please," Tiffany cut in, pushing the plate aside. "And bring me mineral water without gas. Not from a bottle, but from a carafe, with ice and a slice of lemon." Rachel, who had been watching the scene, quietly said to Alice, "Don't pay attention, sweetheart, enjoy your celebration." Alice squeezed her mother's hand gratefully. Rachel was her quiet haven, always calm, never causing problems, supporting without unnecessary words. After the appetizers, the first congratulations began. Colleagues presented Alice with a certificate for spa treatments and a bouquet of roses. Olivia, speaking on behalf of the office, gave a touching speech about what a wonderful person Alice was and how lucky everyone was to work with her. Classmates gave her a set of expensive cosmetics and an album of school year photos, sparking a wave of nostalgia in Alice. Steve sat next to his mother, occasionally leaning over to whisper and laugh. He barely looked at his wife, as if her birthday was just an excuse to meet with friends and his mother. When the main course was served, Tiffany took pills from her purse and demonstratively laid them next to her plate. "Digestive enzymes," she explained to her table neighbor. "At my age, you have to watch your health carefully." Although some, she cast a pointed glance at Alice, seemed to think that at 30 you can eat whatever you want. Alice remained silent, enjoying the tasty Dorado fillet. She wasn't going to spoil her mood over her mother-in-law's barbs. After the main course, the host announced a dance break. The musicians played a slow tune, and Steve, after a meaningful look from his mother, finally remembered his marital duties. "Shall we dance?" he offered Alice, extending his hand. They stepped into the center of the hall. Steve placed his hands on her waist, Alice put hers on his shoulders. They moved to the rhythm of the music, but there seemed to be an invisible wall between them. Steve looked somewhere over her head, clearly lost in thought. "Do you like the party?" Alice asked, trying to connect. "Yes, everything's fine," he answered mechanically. "Mom's happy too, though she says the meat is a bit dry." Alice pursed her lips. "And what about you? How's the meat?" "It's fine," he shrugged. "I'm not picky, you know that." After the dance, Steve quickly returned to the table to his mother, who immediately started telling him something, gesturing actively. Alice stayed on the dance floor, and soon her friends joined her. They danced to lively tunes, laughed, and for a while Alice forgot about the tension lingering at the table. Returning to the guests, she saw Rachel sitting alone, watching the fun with a gentle smile. Tiffany had moved to the next table where Steve's friends sat, animatedly talking to them, occasionally glancing toward Alice and her mother. "Everything okay, Mom?" Alice asked, sitting down next to her. Rachel nodded. "Of course, sweetheart. A wonderful celebration. You look so beautiful today." Alice hugged her mother. "Thank you for coming. I know it's hard for you after your shift." "Oh, come on," Rachel shook her head. "I'd move mountains for you." At that moment, Steve approached them. "Alice, Mom wants to make a toast. Come to the table." Alice and her mother returned to the main table. Tiffany was already standing, holding a glass of champagne. She waited until Alice sat down, then gestured for the musicians to lower the volume. "Attention, dear guests," she announced in a clear voice. "Today is a special day, an anniversary, and I, as the mother of the birthday girl's husband, want to say a few words." The guests fell silent and turned to her. Steve looked at his mother with admiration, preparing his phone to record. Alice tensed. Something in her mother-in-law's voice made her clench inwardly. She felt her mother's hand gently cover hers under the table. Tiffany scanned the quiet room with a look and smiled with that particular smile Alice had already learned to recognize as a harbinger of trouble. Life is amazing, the mother-in-law began, raising her glass higher. You never know what twists of fate lie around the corner. My son, coming from a good, cultured family, well-educated, working at a prestigious company, suddenly meets. She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. A girl from a completely different world, and falls in love so deeply that he loses his mind. A light murmur ran through the hall. Alice felt her face flush with heat. Alice, Tiffany continued, looking directly at her, has become part of our family, and today we celebrate her 30th birthday. An anniversary. Let us raise our glasses to the cleaning lady's daughter who made such a fortunate marriage. She pronounced the last words with a special emphasis, pausing before and after cleaning lady's daughter. The restaurant fell silent. Someone in the crowd choked on their wine, another sharply lowered their eyes to their plate. The waiters carrying dessert froze with trays in their hands. Steve didn't look shocked or embarrassed. On the contrary, he was choking with laughter, filming everything on his phone. He found it incredibly witty, his wife's reaction to the blatant humiliation from his mother. Alice felt her dress suddenly unbearably tight. The bracelet her mother had given her felt heavy on her wrist. She wanted to disappear, sink into the ground, to be anywhere but here, under the gaze of dozens of eyes. Rachel sat very straight. Her hand still covered her daughter's palm but now trembled noticeably. She looked at Tiffany with an expression Alice had never seen on her quiet, modest mother's face before. Tiffany, pleased with the effect she had produced, took an elegant sip from her glass and lowered herself onto her chair, casting a triumphant glance at Alice. Mom was joking, Steve finally spoke up, still filming. She has a peculiar sense of humor. Right, Alice? But Alice couldn't answer. A lump caught in her throat, and red spots floated before her eyes. She looked at her mother-in-law and husband, feeling the carefully built house of cards of her family life collapse. Rachel slowly rose from the table. The room was so quiet you could hear the chair legs scrape the parquet. The elderly woman straightened to her full height, and suddenly it became clear where her daughter's proud posture and steel character came from. She looked at Tiffany with a long, scrutinizing gaze that made her stop smiling. The room held its breath. Everyone present felt that something significant was about to happen. Even the musicians stopped playing, unwitting witnesses to the unfolding drama. Rachel scanned the guests and finally fixed her gaze on Tiffany. Her voice came quietly but clearly in the ringing silence. Your son is impotent. Rachel's words hung in the air like a sudden gunshot. Tiffany froze with her mouth slightly open. Her hand holding the glass trembled, and the delicate crystal slipped from her fingers, shattering on the parquet floor. The sound of breaking glass rang sharply in the deafening silence. Steve stopped filming. The phone in his hand dropped, his face contorted as if in physical pain. A blush that started at his neck rapidly spread to his cheeks and up to his hairline. He looked like a man caught naked in a crowded square. What? Tiffany finally managed to gasp, clutching the edge of the table. What did you say? Rachel didn't raise her voice, but now every word she spoke was clear and weighty. I said your son Steve suffers from impotence. And you know it very well. Alice told me you have problems with your air. Rachel's voice remained calm, but in the silence, it hit like a blow. And it's not her fault. The doctors explained the cause. Tiffany straightened sharply, clutching her chest convulsively. How dare you? This is outrageous. She looked at her son. Steve, say something. But Steve remained silent. He looked at his mother-in-law with an expression of utter horror, realizing that the secret he had carefully guarded even from his closest friends was now known to everyone. Olivia, Alice's friend, covered her mouth with her hand. Steve's colleagues exchanged confused glances. The waiters, still standing in the hall, turned away as if giving the guests some privacy, but it was clear they were hanging on every word. "Do you realize what you just said?" Tiffany's voice trembled. "This is slander. My son is completely healthy." Rachel only shook her head slowly. "My daughter has been living in a marriage for 2 years where she is humiliated because of the lack of children. For 2 years, she's been hearing hints about her uselessness. Meanwhile, your son has a serious reproductive disorder. And you know it." Tiffany went pale. Her hand, still pressed to her chest, clenched into a fist. "That's not true. My Steve. He..." Suddenly Steve jumped up, knocking over his chair. "Enough," he shouted. "Alice, you told her? You promised it would stay between us." Alice watched everything unfold in slow motion. Her mother, quiet, restrained, never raising her voice, stood now straight as a rod and was destroying the facade built by the Zavilov family for years. "I told Mom," Alice finally spoke, her voice trembling but firm, "because I couldn't bear the lies anymore. Every time your mother hinted at my inadequacy, I held back. For you. But today she crossed every line." Someone coughed. Pavel, Steve's friend, awkwardly looked away. "Maybe we should leave," he muttered. "This is personal." "Stay," Alice said unexpectedly firmly. "Since Tiffany decided to turn my personal life into a public spectacle, let's be consistent." Tiffany slowly sank into her chair. Her breathing became uneven. "I feel bad, heart pills." Steve rushed to his mother, grabbing a blister pack from her purse. He placed a pill under her tongue, holding her chin with trembling fingers. "Mom, don't worry. Everything will be fine. This is just a misunderstanding." He turned to Alice, his face twisted with rage. "Happy now? You made my mother have a breakdown on your birthday?" Alice didn't have time to respond. "Don't shift the blame, young man," Rachel's voice was as cold as ice. "Your mother deliberately humiliated my daughter. What did she expect in response? Gratitude?" Tiffany, somewhat recovering, now looked at Rachel with hatred. "You're just a cleaning lady. How dare you talk to me like that? Who do you think you are?" Rachel straightened even more. "I am a mother," she answered calmly. "And I won't let anyone humiliate my child." Steve shifted his gaze from his mother to his wife. "Alice, this is going too far. Apologize to my mom. Immediately." Alice froze. Something inside her snapped. Everything, 2 years of humiliation, endless attempts to be acceptable, hopes for reconciliation, all shattered in an instant. But with the pain came an unexpected feeling, freedom. "Apologize," she repeated, looking him straight in the eyes. "For what, Steve? For my mother telling the truth? Or for daring to hold a celebration that your mother turned into a public execution?" "You're exaggerating," he waved her off. "Mom just made a bad joke. And you spilled our secret. No one was supposed to know. Only us, the doctors." He stopped, shifting his gaze to Rachel. "And my mom," Alice finished for him, "because I needed support, Steve, because I couldn't listen any longer to your mother hinting at my inadequacy while knowing the truth." Tiffany, already somewhat recovered, stood up, leaning on her son's arm. "We're leaving immediately. Steve, grab my bag and coat." Steve nodded like an obedient child, ready to fulfill any wish of his mother. "Wait." Alice stood between them and the door. "You're not leaving that easily, not after what happened here. Get out of the way," Tiffany whispered. Your family life is over. Tomorrow, I'm sending Steve to a lawyer. Rachel, who had been watching the exchange quietly, said softly, Don't you think this should be decided by your daughter-in-law? As far as I remember, both parties have to agree to a divorce. Mom, please, Alice said quietly, let me handle this myself. She turned to her husband. Steve, do you want a divorce? Steve looked confused. He shifted his gaze from his mother to his wife, clearly unprepared for such a direct question. Alice, let's not decide this right now. It's all emotional. No, she replied firmly. I want to know now. After 2 years of marriage, after everything I've endured from your mother since I supported you when we found out about your diagnosis, I have the right to know. Do you want a divorce? Tiffany didn't let her son answer. Of course he does. Do you think my son will live with a woman who publicly shamed our family? I'm not talking to you, Alice cut in without taking her eyes off her husband. Steve. He swallowed and looked down. I need to think. Alice nodded, as if she had received exactly the answer she expected. That's good. Think. And while you think, you can pack your things and stay at your mom's. I need space. Tiffany gasped in outrage. What's this? You have to move out. Steve is the one renting the apartment. The lease is in my name, Alice calmly countered. And we pay half each, so I have the right to decide who stays. Steve looked bewildered, as if he were seeing his wife for the first time. This confident, determined woman was a stark contrast to the one who usually gave in to every argument with his mother. Alice, maybe we should talk alone, he suggested. No, she shook her head. I think we've already said everything to each other. Or rather, everything has been said for us. She gave a meaningful look at Tiffany. Tiffany lunged forward, but Steve held her back. Mom, calm down, you have a heart. Let it go. She yanked her hand away. That girl doesn't dare talk to me like that. Steve, if you're a man, put her in her place. The guests, who had silently watched the drama unfold, began quietly whispering among themselves. Olivia approached Alice and quietly asked, Do you need help? Maybe call a taxi, or are you okay? Alice gratefully squeezed her friend's hand. This was bound to happen sooner or later. Tiffany, realizing she was losing control of the situation, launched a final attack. Steve, we're leaving right now, and you're filing for divorce tomorrow. I won't let my son be humiliated. Steve stood, shifting his gaze between his mother and wife. At that moment, he looked especially pitiful, a confused man unable to make his own choice. He began, but Tiffany interrupted. No eyes. We're leaving. She grabbed her son's arm and pulled him toward the exit. Steve cast one last glance at Alice. And it was confusion, fear, maybe even regret, but he let his mother lead him away. When the door closed behind them, a heavy silence fell over the hall. 30 people had just witnessed the collapse of a family. Alice stood in the middle of the room, feeling the gazes of everyone present, sympathetic, curious, embarrassed. Rachel approached her daughter and quietly asked, Are you okay? Alice took a deep breath. No, but I will be. She turned to the guests and, unexpectedly even to herself, smiled. A little forced, but sincere. Sorry for the spectacle. This is not how I imagined my anniversary. Alice, we can leave if you want, one of her friends offered. You probably want to be alone? No, Alice answered decisively. I spent 3 months planning this evening. I won't let Tiffany steal my celebration too. She went up to the musicians and asked them to continue playing. Then she addressed the host. "Patrick, please, let's continue the program. We haven't even cut the cake yet." The host, professionally hiding his surprise, nodded. "Of course, Alice. Ladies and gentlemen, now comes the sweetest moment of our evening." The waiters, having received the signal, brought out a large cake with lit candles. The musicians started playing Happy Birthday. The guests hesitated a bit at first, but then began to sing along with growing confidence. Alice stood before the cake, looking at the candle flames. In their flickering light reflected everything that had happened over these 2 years: hopes, disappointments, pain, humiliation, and now the climax. "Make a wish," Rachel said softly, standing nearby. Alice closed her eyes. What could she wish for? For Steve to come back? For everything to magically fix itself? For Tiffany to disappear from their lives? No, none of that was it. She opened her eyes and took a deep breath, then blew out the candles with a single decisive breath. The guests applauded. "What did you wish for?" Olivia asked as the waiters began cutting the cake. Alice smiled. This time, truly. Freedom. I wished for freedom. Gradually, the atmosphere in the room began to thaw. People returned to their tables, speaking more quietly than usual, but no longer with the tense silence that had settled after Steve and his mother left. Alice went around the guests, thanking them for coming, accepting belated congratulations. She did it all mechanically, as if watching herself from the outside. Part of her was still in shock from what had happened, but another part, the part that had suppressed her true feelings for years, finally breathed freely. Rachel sat quietly at the table, watching her daughter. When Alice returned to her, she silently took her hand. "Mom," Alice whispered, "you didn't have to." "I did," Rachel replied softly. "I was silent too long, watching you wither away in that marriage. But now everyone knows." "So what?" Rachel shrugged. "The truth is better than lies, sweetheart, always." Alice looked closely at her mother, the simple woman who had worked hard all her life to give her daughter an education, who never complained even when times were tough, who stoically endured the contempt of people like Tiffany. "You're amazing," Alice said softly. "I've never seen you so determined." Rachel smiled gently. "It was just time. I couldn't watch that woman humiliate you anymore, especially when she used my profession as a weapon against you." "Aren't you ashamed of your job, though?" Alice suddenly asked. "Never," Rachel answered firmly. "I've always been proud that with my own hands I provided you a decent life. I may have cleaned floors, but you got a higher education and found a good job. That's my greatest victory." Alice hugged her mother tightly, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you for everything." The celebration went on for about another hour. Guests gradually left, warmly saying goodbye to Alice. In their eyes, she saw sympathy but also respect. She hadn't broken down or run away in tears, she had preserved her dignity. When the last guest left, Alice remained alone in the empty hall with her mother. The waiters were clearing the dishes, and the musicians were packing up their instruments. "Let's go to my place," Rachel suggested. "I don't want you to be alone tonight." Alice shook her head. "No, Mom, I'll go home. I have a lot to think about." "Are you sure?" Rachel asked with concern. "And what if Steve comes back?" "He won't," Alice replied confidently. "At least not today. Right now, he's comforting Mommy and listening to how ungrateful I am." Rachel sighed. "Still, call me when you get home, anytime." Alice agreed, hugged her mother goodbye, and called a taxi. Sitting in the back seat, Watching the night streets flash by the window, she suddenly realized that today really marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Maybe not the way she planned, but perhaps exactly what was needed. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, looked at her in the rearview mirror. "Celebrating something? You're dressed so beautifully." Alice met his eyes in the mirror and smiled. "Yes, today I'm celebrating my freedom." He didn't ask any more questions, just nodded as if he understood everything. Alice leaned back in the seat, looking at the starry sky through the taxi window, and for the first time in a long while, she felt she could breathe deeply. The taxi stopped at the entrance right at midnight. Alice paid the driver and slowly climbed the steps. The party shoes that had seemed comfortable in the morning now pinched mercilessly, and the beautiful dress felt cold in the chilly night air. She took out her keys and froze in front of her apartment door, realizing she didn't know what awaited her inside. Had Steve come back? Had he packed his things? Or maybe he and Tiffany had decided to set a trap and continue the scandal at home. Taking a deep breath, Alice unlocked the door. The apartment was dark and quiet. She flicked on the light and looked around. Everything looked exactly as she had left it during the day. Steve's tie lay on the coffee table, the one he had tried on before going out but decided at the last minute to replace with another. A cup with half-finished coffee stood in the sink. Normal life, which now seemed to belong to someone else. Alice kicked off her shoes, walked to the hallway mirror, and stared at her reflection for a long time. Her carefully styled hair was a bit tousled, her makeup slightly smudged, but something new appeared in her eyes, the calm determination of a person who had shed a heavy burden. She went to the bedroom, unzipped her dress, letting it slide to the floor, and put on a robe. Then she sat on the bed and finally allowed herself what she had held back all evening. She cried. Not out of grief or resentment, but from emotional exhaustion, as if something inside her that had been tense for so long had finally let go. Her phone buzzed with notifications, messages from friends and colleagues, questions, support, but not one from Steve. Alice dialed her mother's number. "Mom, I'm home. Everything's fine." Rachel's voice carried worry. "Yeah, Steve's not there. I think he's spending the night with Mommy." "All right," her mother calmed down a bit. "How are you?" Alice paused, gathering her thoughts. "It's strange," she began, like waking up from a long sleep. "You know, I really did love him once." "I know, sweetheart. 2 years, Mom. 2 years. I tried to live up to their standards, to be a good wife by Tiffany's definition. And for what? To be humiliated at my own anniversary." Rachel sighed. People like her are never satisfied. They always need someone to put down to feel superior. "You know what hurts the most?" Alice continued. "Not that she called me a cleaning lady's daughter, but that Steve laughed and recorded it on his phone. He thought it was funny." "He was always weak," Rachel said gently. "A man who at 30 can't break away from his mother's apron strings is unlikely to be a reliable husband." Alice smiled sadly. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Would you have listened?" Her mother asked reasonably. Giving advice to someone in love is pointless. They talked a bit more. Rachel made sure her daughter was okay, and they agreed to meet the next day. After the call, Alice made herself some tea and sat by the window, looking out at the city at night. For the first time in a long while, she had nowhere to rush to, no one to please, no one to take care of. Morning brought news. The phone woke Alice at 8. It was Olivia calling. "Alice, have you seen it?" her friend asked excitedly. "Seen what?" Alice responded sleepily, struggling to open her eyes. "Check Instagram. Right now." Alice sat up in bed and opened the app. The first thing she saw was a photo from her birthday, taken by one of the guests. It showed Tiffany with her glass raised high and a triumphant smile on her face, giving her toast. The caption read, "Mother-in-law from hell humiliates daughter-in-law at her own birthday, calling her a cleaner's daughter." But the mother-in-law was shut down with one sentence. "Oh my God." Alice exhaled. "Who posted this?" "No idea," Olivia replied. "But it's already gone viral. Tons of reposts, comments. Most people are siding with you and your mom." Alice scrolled through the comments. The mother-in-law got what she deserved. Supermom protected her daughter. Classic toxic family with a mama's boy. And hundreds like it. "I'm in shock," Alice muttered. "My private hell has become public entertainment." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you," Olivia said apologetically. "I just thought you should know." Alice thanked her friend and hung up. She walked into the kitchen, absent-mindedly put the kettle on, and opened her phone again, checking more posts. The story was spreading like wildfire. People were discussing it, sharing it, even adding made-up details. In some versions, Tiffany was already portrayed as a former party official, and Rachel as a heroic single mother working 3 jobs. The phone rang again. This time it was Steve. Alice stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. "Yes," she said flatly. "Have you seen what's going on?" Steve got straight to the point. His voice was tense, laced with panic. "About the social media posts?" "Yeah, I just found out." "This is a nightmare," he exclaimed. "Mom is hysterical. Friends, co-workers, they're all calling her. Everyone's seen the posts." Alice stayed silent, waiting for him to go on. "You have to deny it all," Steve demanded. "Say it was a joke, a prank, something." Alice laughed humorlessly. "Deny it? A joke? Steve, your mother publicly humiliated me in front of all our guests, called me the cleaner's daughter with so much contempt like it was some kind of brand. And you filmed it on your phone and laughed. What exactly should I be denying? But it's affecting me." He cried out in desperation. "This is personal, Alice. Can you imagine what it'll be like at work? How people will look at me." "And how do you think they looked at me, Steve?" She asked quietly. "After your mother basically announced to everyone that I married you for convenience, using a cleaner's daughter as an insult. Did you think about that?" Silence hung on the other end of the line. "By the way, I didn't post it," Alice added, "and I have no idea who did. There were 30 people at the party. Could have been anyone." "Mom's in the hospital," Steve suddenly said, changing tactics. "Hypertensive crisis. The doctors say she could have a stroke." Alice closed her eyes. She knew this trick. Tiffany always got sick during critical moments, whenever she needed to manipulate her son or make her daughter-in-law feel guilty. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "I hope she gets better." "You have to come," Steve insisted. "Apologize to her. It might calm her down." "No, Steve," Alice said firmly. "I'm not coming, and I won't apologize for something I didn't do. I didn't cause the scene at the party. I didn't post anything online. And if you want my opinion, your mother needs to learn that her actions have consequences." "You're heartless," Steve snapped. "I thought you loved me." "I did love you," Alice replied quietly. "For 2 years, I tried to be part of your family. I endured humiliation, hints, condescending attitudes. I supported you when we found out about your diagnosis, even though your mother did everything to blame me for the infertility. And what did I get in return? You let your mother humiliate me in public and filmed it on your phone. That's what your love looks like, Steve. She heard a ragged breath on the other end of the line. I was in shock. I didn't know how to react. 2 years, Alice repeated. 2 years I waited for you to take my side even once, but you always chose your mother. So what now? Steve asked dully after a pause. I think we need to separate, Alice replied calmly. This marriage was a mistake from the beginning. His voice suddenly turned pleading. Alice, let's talk everything through when Mom gets better. I'll come over, we'll figure it out. No, Steve, it's not because of one incident. It's because of 2 years full of incidents like this. Yesterday was just the last straw. You can't just throw it all away, he cried. We had good times too. We did, Alice agreed. And I'm grateful for them. But that's not enough for a marriage. Marriage is partnership, support, respect. We didn't have any of that. I love you, Steve suddenly said. Alice closed her eyes. Once, those words would have made her heart race. Now, they sounded hollow. Goodbye, Steve, she said softly and ended the call. All day, her phone buzzed with calls and messages. Colleagues, acquaintances, even people she hadn't heard from in years reached out. Everyone wanted details about the scandal, to offer support, or just to satisfy their curiosity. By evening, she turned the sound off and lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The doorbell rang around 7. Rachel stood on the threshold with grocery bags. I figured you're not in the mood to cook, she said, walking to the kitchen. I'll make us dinner. Alice hugged her mother gratefully. You're my lifesaver. While Rachel worked her magic at the stove, Alice told her about Steve's call and how the story had spread across the internet. This whole buzz will die down soon, her mother remarked philosophically. People are like vegetables, they'll move on to the next thing. Tiffany's in the hospital, Alice said. Hypertensive crisis. Rachel was silent for a moment, then asked gently, Do you feel guilty? Alice thought for a moment. No. Maybe I should, but I don't. She got exactly what she deserved. If a person sows hatred and contempt for years, it eventually comes back to them. Exactly right, Rachel nodded. You can't take responsibility for someone else's actions. Over dinner, they talked about the future, that maybe Alice should change jobs, start fresh. Maybe even change cities, Rachel suggested. Move to Moscow or St. Petersburg. With your qualifications, you'll find something. But what about you? Alice asked. What about me? Her mother shrugged. I'll find work anywhere. My hands are always needed. Alice looked at her mother closely, at her tired hands, her gray hair, the fine lines around her eyes. This woman had spent her whole life sacrificing for her daughter, never complaining, never asking for thanks. I'm so proud of you, Mom, she suddenly said. I've always been proud of you too, Rachel replied, flustered. Oh, come on, I'm just an ordinary woman. Nothing special. No, you're not ordinary, Alice said firmly. You're the strongest person I know. And I'm proud to be a cleaner's daughter if that cleaner is you. They talked late into the night. Rachel stayed over, refusing to go home at such a late hour. Before bed, Alice checked her phone, a dozen new messages and one missed call from Steve. She ignored it and opened a message from Olivia. How are you holding up? Coming to work tomorrow? Alice thought for a moment. Going back to the office, where everyone would be whispering about her scandalous birthday, didn't appeal to her. But hiding didn't either. "I'll come," she replied. "It's time to move on." The morning began with a persistent knock at the door. Alice, just awakened and not yet having had her coffee, opened it, expecting to see Steve. But standing on the threshold was Tiffany, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, no longer in hospital clothes but wearing her usual formal suit. "Hello," Alice said coldly, surprised by the visit. "I came to talk," Tiffany replied curtly. "Come in." Alice silently stepped aside, letting her mother-in-law into the apartment. Rachel emerged from the kitchen, having heard voices, and froze upon seeing the guest. "You're here too," Tiffany remarked, pressing her lips together. "Well, that's even better. This concerns you as well." "Come into the living room," said Alice, closing the door. "Would you like some tea?" "No pleasantries," Tiffany snapped. "I'm here on business." They entered the living room. Tiffany remained standing, refusing to sit. "Because of you," she began, looking at Rachel, "my reputation is ruined. Everyone I know is talking about me. My colleagues from the library are calling with condolences. I had to turn off my phone." "Because of me?" Rachel asked calmly. "Weren't you the one who publicly humiliated my daughter first?" "It was a toast," Tiffany exclaimed. "Just a simple joke." "A joke?" Alice stepped closer. "Calling me the cleaner's daughter with such disdain in front of all the guests at my birthday party, that was a joke?" Tiffany hesitated for a moment but quickly composed herself. "You misunderstood. I simply wanted to highlight the journey you've made, Alice, from the daughter of a cleaning lady to an office manager at a respectable company." It was a compliment. "There's no need to lie," Rachel said gently. "You knew exactly what you were doing." "I knew it, and so did all the guests." Tiffany took a breath, clearly holding back her anger. "Fine, let's say I was wrong," she said. "But what you did was far worse. You revealed my son's private medical information." Tiffany began. "That's illegal," Alice interjected. "That's not medical information," Tiffany countered. "It's a fact of our family life that you used against me, constantly hinting at my infertility even though you knew the truth." "Steve is depressed," Tiffany continued, changing tactics. "He won't leave his room, he refuses to eat. Do you realize what you've done? And do you realize what you've done to my daughter for 2 years?" Rachel asked quietly. What it was like for her to endure your comments, the humiliation, to see her husband always take your side.